right? All right, let's go. Okay. In order to live from the inside out, we have to stay aware of the state of our hearts, our thoughts, physical sensations, and our emotions. And last week, we discussed one of the central blocks to self-awareness, which is the voice of the inner coach. Like a shaming math teacher causes the brain of her student to completely shut down and renders him incapable of doing anything, our inner coach can do the exact same thing when we begin to evaluate rather than just observe what comes out, the messages from those indicator lights. Because our brains have to have safety in order to maintain curiosity. We need regulated nervous systems in order to do the work of heart awareness. Shame or even correction at this point causes our lower brains to take charge, which moves us into a state where survival, not growth, is the only goal. And we get stuck in that loop. You know that loop. I can't believe I just thought that. What kind of a person thinks something like that? Certainly not one who's Christ-like. Maybe I don't even care about being Christ-like. Maybe I don't even believe. Maybe I am really, really screwed up. Now, you see the process of what happens. Those thoughts start coming out. You start evaluating those thoughts. You get distracted, and you go straight away from distraction to despair. And the whole process is derailed. So that's what that harsh inner coach does, and why he or she must change both timing and also tone of input. Think right now of a person in whose presence you feel really safe. Not coddled, just seen and safe, not judged. My husband, we were best friends for this sounds bad. We were best friends for 5 years before we started dating. So I guess, and then we were really best friends. But anyway, originally we would just talk and talk and talk and talk. And I remember telling him one night, "You are just so wise. Thank you for what you give to me." And he smiles and says, "Well, really, I don't say a whole lot to you. I just let you talk. And eventually you just kind of get around to your own good input." Okay? He gives me space. So whatever the voice is of that person you just got in your head, that's the voice that I want you to emulate. And you can really teach that inner coach a whole different way. One that is a whole lot more effective. Romans 2:4. The kindness of God leads us to repentance. Similarly, we have to be careful to be kind to our own selves in our heads. Why? To keep us curious, open, and moving forward into growth and change, because a calm nervous system, it actually allows our brains to create new neural pathways, which make change a possibility. Doctors Henry Cloud and John Townsend wrote in the book Boundaries, "We need to have spaces inside of ourselves where we can have a feeling, an impulse, or a desire without acting it out. We need self-control without repression." In other words, we need to live from the inside out, and our heart matters more than what we do. We need to regulate before we respond. Awareness of your indicator lights, that process of doing that regular heart check that we've talked about during times of non-stress, is hugely helpful to stay regulated and also help get you back in regulation when you've been knocked out of it, and help you stay in a place of regulation. Let me define that for you. To be regulated means to be in a place where you are neither cut off from your thoughts, physical sensations, or emotions, nor are you overwhelmed by them. That would be the definition of regulation, and that's what we're moving towards. So if you had an anxiety scale from 1 to 10, healthy regulation would be about 5. So that's where I was about 15 to 20 years ago when I was in a Paris subway station with my husband and my 3 kids. And we were just going along, and everything was fine. My husband, he had everything we needed. He had our passports, he had our money, he had the directions of where we needed to go. The subway arrives, and my daughters and I step onto the subway, And my husband and my son stayed back on the platform because they were handing us our luggage. And I'm sure that at some point, there must have been some kind of an announcement that came over the loudspeaker that the doors were about to close, but we don't speak French, so we didn't catch that announcement. So you can imagine our surprise when the doors slammed shut. My daughters and I are inside the car. Outside the car is my husband, my son. Remember, my husband, the one with the money, the passports, and the directions. So, and this is all before cell phones, by the way. So immediately and completely without any degree of conscious thought, I began beating on the doors and screaming at the top of my lungs to open up the doors. Like, I don't even know who I was talking to. And at the same time, my husband, he starts running along outside the edge of the moving train, seeking to go through the map to tell me exactly which stations we need to go to, change, so we could meet them there. And he's screaming that out. Now, and of course I didn't hear because I was too busy screaming inside and banging on the doors. And I know, kind of an obvious question would be, why didn't either one of us just think to just say, just meet us at the next stop? I have no idea. That never even occurred to us. I'll tell you what also never occurred to me was what the people who were on the subway would be thinking of this screaming American lunatic. I can still see the faces. You know, after everything calmed down, I turned back around and faced this entire, first off, my horrified daughters, who, by the way, for the rest of the trip were like, okay, I want to be with you, Dad. I want to be with you, Dad. But anyway, just all of those people just staring at me like I had come from outer space. And that is exactly what happens when we go from a regulated state to extreme dysregulation. See, the upper part of both my brain and my husband's brain that's responsible for reasoning and impulse control was completely offline. And our lower brains were now in charge. And they were telling us to do whatever we had to do to get back to safety, even if that meant screaming your head off in front of strangers, even if that meant moving alongside a fast-moving train, screaming instructions at your hysterical wife inside. Because the lower brain is designed to protect us and bring us back to safety by reflex rather than response. And those reflex causes us to do fight, flight, freeze, or numb. None of those states allows us to regulate ourselves. So pretty much we have to wait until that storm passes for just a bit, until our upper brain comes back online. But extreme circumstances like that, they're really pretty rare, but it is not rare for situations to potentially trigger us and trigger our cause trigger responses that send us into really similar states if we live unaware of our indicator lights. Trauma therapist Andy Kolber says, picture the difference between being stuck outside in the middle of a storm and watching on a forecast of that upcoming storm while sitting safely in your home. While you're in the storm without an umbrella, no less, all you can do is react. But when you know the storm is coming, you can respond to the threat by staying inside or grabbing rain gear on your way out of the house. Instead of just reacting, you respond deliberately. Watching our indicator lights, that's like watching the forecast of an impending storm. They help us stay regulated, and they help get us back into regulation. I once had a client, and she told me how she and her husband had an argument. Now, this is the same argument that they had been having for 30 plus years of marriage. This is the same argument that I hear day in, week in, week out when I do counseling. And it's the same argument that I also host in my own living room. The one where he said something that she didn't like, and so she told him so as soon as she got the chance. And boom, he became really angry, really fast, saying, "It doesn't matter what I do, it's always wrong." So she sighs and she says to me, "Well, I guess I can't say a thing to him without it turning into a fight." So often, what seems like a marital issue is actually really an individual issue that gets exposed in the context of marriage. And this was the case with both the husband and the wife, because they were both triggered with the words of the other. They were poked. An old wound was poked, an old wound that had been unattended to. Now, the word trigger is grossly overused and misused in our culture today, yet it's really an important one. It's one we need to know and understand. Remember, one of the most important functions of your brain is to protect you from harm, be it physical or emotional. And the way it does that is it stores the memory of an injury that you might have had. And then it constantly scans to detect any sign that you are about to be injured in a similar way once again. When you're in a situation that gives an appearance of the one that you were in when you were wounded, your brain gets triggered back again into fight, flight, freeze, or numb. You know you've been triggered when you have a response that, let's just say, it is significantly more than the situation maybe warrants. And it's really important to know your triggers, not so that you can tell everybody around you so that they can tiptoe around you and not trigger you. You need to know your triggers so that you know them, because that knowledge helps you increase your window of tolerance and allows you to respond rather than react. So let's look at how this played out with my client. I asked her to walk me through what had happened inside of her prior to when she engaged with her husband. Now, the backstory here is that they had only very recently restored a relationship with a family member that had been really, really fractured. It was very painful. And it had just recently been restored, and that family member actually sent a text at one point to both the husband and the wife. They weren't together at the time. And that she sent a text that said, some expression of her gratitude for that restoration. And the husband texted back a response that my client felt could really easily have been taken as offense, or at least really insensitive. So I asked her, so when you read that text from him, what am I doing, by the way? I'm going through event, reading the text, think, feel, behave. So I said to her, so when you read the text, what went on inside of you? And she said immediately that she felt her neck and her face grow hot. That's the first indicator light right there, right? Physical sensation is giving her an alert, something's going on. And that she was about to head right into dysregulation. And then she also said, and I was horrified and furious. There's a second indicator light, strong emotion. And I asked her, what thoughts were going through your mind at the time that would have given rise to those feelings? And she said, after all we've been through, he didn't even consider how that text could have been received. I was terrified that we would end up right back where we had been with that family member. And that was the trigger. She wanted so desperately to protect that newly restored relationship that when she read what her husband had written, her brain told her, act now to prevent injury. So she ignored those indicator lights, and she went headlong into a fight response. As soon as she was able to, she engaged her husband. But given the fact that she had not attended to anything that was going on inside of her, the energy, let's say, with which she engaged her husband caused him to feel very attacked. Which, by the way, did what? Well, that triggered him, right? Because, see, he's got a wound inside of him of her disapproval, and she just poked that. So he has a fight response right back, and that's what we're dealing with. I listened to a podcast recently, and I thought that the guy said it really well. He said, situations like this, it's like you've got two couples running side by side on two separate treadmills trying to carry on a conversation. You can't connect like that, right? Because your adrenaline is pumping. So there's really, really no way to have a safe or an effective good conversation. After raising their voices at one another in combat, each fell into complete silence because they became hopeless. And so notice, they went from a fight response into a numb response. They continued on life with life for the rest of the weekend, but they cut themselves off from feeling for one another so that they wouldn't be hurt again. Now, how might this have gone differently for my client? If she had heeded those indicator lights, she would have known to regulate before responding. Regulate before respond. So I said to her, okay, let's rewind the tape. Beginning, she reads the text. Number 1, indicator light goes on. Doesn't matter. Remember, this process doesn't matter where we start. We're going to start wherever the light goes on. So she says her physical sensation. That's the first thing. Indicator light goes on. You observe that, and you ask, what about the other lights? What else is going on? Okay? So the first thing you do is, what am I feeling? What am I thinking? Where am I feeling it? 2. Sorry, that is, what am I feeling, right? And she said, anger and fear. 3, what thoughts are those feelings coming from? And she had said, his thoughtless text, that's going to send us right back into fracture. Now, what I'm doing with my client right here is cultivating that space that we were talking about earlier. Now, I was doing it with her, but this is something that you can do in your own mind. You can, in your own mind, cultivate that same safe space where she could non-judgmentally unpack what was in her heart. No evaluation yet of anything, just curiosity, which leads to clarity, and it calms our brains. Psychologist Dan Siegel refers to this as taming it, what's inside, by naming it. Just the process of awareness, just the process of putting words to what's going on within you has this calming effect on your brain. Her action, the way that she engaged her husband, is that really what she needed to begin exploring? Is that what I needed to talk to her about as her counselor? No. Because after hearing what was in her heart, you can see, truthfully, what she did, the way she behaved, it made complete sense, didn't it? Given where she was coming from, I'm not saying whether it was right or wrong. I am saying it makes complete sense. And she knew, she didn't need to be told. She already knew that she had engaged him in a way that was probably wrong, but she did it anyway. Why? Because if we don't pay attention to the indicator lights and attend to what's going on within us, we are going to act out of those wounds. And when we're acting out of a wound, we begin to lose the choices that we have to respond. So, once she had answered how she was feeling, where she was holding those feelings physically, and what she was thinking about that gave rise to those feelings, she'd identified those. I said, now stop. Breathe for just a moment. Imagine, if you will, holding a goldfish bowl. There's water in it, there's gravel in it, and it's swirling around. Swirling around in that goldfish bowl is those thoughts, those physical sensations, and those feelings. Just hold it. Breathe. Now, basically what we're doing right there is we're buying a little bit of time, right, to let that upper brain come back online, because before the upper brain comes back on, we can't do a whole lot of work, can we? So once she's calmed just a bit, step 5 is pray. Simple prayer. Jesus, what do I need right now? Don't mishear me. I didn't say, Jesus, what do I need to do? That's the one that we most often say, isn't it? But Jesus, what do I need right now? What parts of my heart need attending to right now. And what's that going to look like? I think perhaps the hardest part of regulation work is attuning to the state of our hearts and to let Jesus teach us how to attend to our hearts rather than act out of them. Does that make sense? Attune to them. Ask the Father to attend to them. If we don't do that, we will act out of that wound. When we act out of that wound, it's going to end up in a place we don't want it to. So, I know that sounds weird, right? What are we waiting on when we ask Jesus? Like some booming voice or handwriting on the wall? No. I mean, you know what he might say could be anything from go take a walk, take a bath, sit here, breathe, do nothing. Go take a walk, or do some thought work, which we're going to talk about later, how to change some of the tapes and replay some of those thoughts that she had in her head that got her revved up in the first place. But you see, she can't do any of that before she's done the other work. So it is I know it's mystical and it's vague, and that can be frustrating here. But I think that the specifics here are really less important than the posture of your heart and where you're taking your heart for healing. You are not taking your heart to you to work harder and get better. And you are also not taking your heart to someone else to do your work for you, to do regulation for you. You're taking your heart to the Father and asking Him, teach me. Every week it comes back to the same thing, doesn't it? We don't know what we're doing. This is above our pay grade. But that's okay. It's fine. Because He says, you're never alone. I'm right here with you. I am yoked to you. Whether you are aware of it or not, I'm right here all the time. Don't pray, Lord, be with us. Where do you think He is? He's right there, always. Matthew 23 invites us to come to Him. Come to Him with our weariness that comes from working life out on our own, and to let Him teach us so that we might find rest and comfort for our souls. It's from that scripture that my friend, who's a singer and a songwriter, Jenny Pruitt, she composed this song that we're about to listen to right now. It's called Come to Me. And I want you to, if you would, listen to this song mindfully, asking the Father to get these words into your soul such that you would experience the kind of rest that she's talking about. Here's the funny thing. I'm telling you, an oxymoron, if you will. I'm saying, be intentional to rest. Yes. Because if we're not intentional and mindful, calm, we won't be, right? We're still going to be striving, kind of like learning how to float. And if you pick your head up, you sink. If you try to help yourself float, you sink. So right now, use this song to go before the Father and ask Him to bring you, to draw you, to help you lay down your yoke, get up under His, and experience the way that He speaks to you, the way that He teaches you, and the way that that then brings you peace. Jesus, we ask that you would alert us and that we would pay attention to the alerts that you do give us. Help us, Father, to heed those before we rush in and take care of things ourselves. Teach us also, Father, to come to you, to attend to whatever is in our hearts that's crying out that it needs attention. Will you show us what that is? Because Jesus, we long to live for your glory, and we don't want to act out of wounds. We want to act in a way that those around us would experience you. Thank you for what you have given to us. You don't leave us alone. Teach us to pay attention to that. In your name, amen.